All right, hi everyone. This is a presentation on honors research I did over the 2021 spring semester. I was paid to continue this research over the summer by Open at RIT. This project was based on the Humanitarian Free and Open Source Software class, also known as HFOSS, and was focused on open source as a whole. However, I also got to focus on open source security and made that one of my primary research goals throughout the project. So today, I just wanted to present my research on open source security, and I wanted to explain what the class is, my research development process, and the research itself. Hopefully, explaining the whole picture will make it easier for everyone here to find, create, and utilize public resources to create their own research projects. Although I've stopped working on the research itself, this project is still a work in progress. And if you're interested in contributing to this project, you can contact me or anyone involved at Open at RIT. Alternatively, you could just take a FOSS class, and because projects are built into the FOSS curriculum, you can choose to either create your own project, work on my project, or work on any other FOSS project throughout the class. But first, a quick introduction. Hi, my name is Olivia Gallucci, and I am a sophomore in RIT's computing security program. I'm double majoring in computer science and minoring in free and open source software and free culture. I came to RIT because of their offensive computing security program and their active free and open source software community. I actually wrote my common application on FOSS, and I would really encourage everyone here to learn more about open source at RIT and globally. Despite my clear love of FOSS, this research has been heavily vetted, so you can guarantee that the claims you hear in this presentation are pretty accurate, because this has been reviewed by the people who I worked for and other people at RIT. I am on LinkedIn, and you can find my resume website and blog at oliviagallucci.com. So what is FOSS? FOSS stands for Free and Open Source Software. The word free represents freedom, not free as in free of cost or free beer. In general, labeling something as FOSS means that the source code is open for anyone to use, study, share, and modify. FOSS is different from open source. Similar to how the word natural is shown on food products and food labeling, open source is a general term that could really mean anything. Usually, it means that at least part of the source code can be viewed by anyone. Other times, however, open source is used as a synonym for FOSS, which makes the phrase open source a great marketing tool because it promises the illusion of freedom without actually needing to provide it. Throughout this presentation, when I use the term open source, I am almost always referring to free and open source software. However, if you go back and look at the individual studies I reference, you should go check to see if that individual study was only talking about free and open source software or all of open source, because there are two studies in my notes that reference open source rather than free and open source software. Also, a side note here, and this is just for general knowledge, but when people are like FOSS and open source doesn't make any money, they don't really know what they're talking about. Again, FOSS, the freedom part, does not refer to cost. It refers to being able to modify it and reuse it and share it and all that. You still have to pay. You can still make subscription services and all of that like Netflix. You can modify content. It's just you still need to pay for it. Yeah, so let's move forward. Here are just a few FOSS programs: Blender, WordPress, Linux, VLC, WordPress. We got a lot, and many of the languages that you use in daily programming, like Python, are also FOSS too. So when you use a programming language, you are technically building upon FOSS. So besides the fact that the humanitarian free and open source software class was the basis of my research, what is HFOSS? HFOSS is a class that provides students the opportunity to explore the design, creation, production of open source projects. Students are introduced to the historic intersections of the processes, tools, and practices of these individual projects. Students then contribute to humanitarian software communities and document their efforts in those communities. Normally, this class is restricted to second-year students, but since I was a first year and took the course, that isn't always the case. If you just email Jacobs, who's the head of the program, he's very lenient and he will almost always let you into the program if you express interest. Also, this course is normally offered in the spring semester. So students are free to use the knowledge they learn to analyze and contribute to open source communities. This is done through the assignments of the course. In general, the glory of FOSS classes is that they cover a lot of content at the beginning of the course, but then students are free to learn, are free to use the knowledge that they learn to do whatever they want with it. And that's where the project aspect comes in. In my case, notable assignments that contributed to this project would include ComArches, the contributions, and the literature reviews. ComArches stand for Community Architecture. ComArches are research projects where students choose an open source project and analyze the history, leadership structure, commit history, stability, and onboarding and support processes for the project. I did mine on Debian, VS Code, and FarmBot, and you can see all three projects on my blog. We also did a bug fix and 3 major contributions. Bug fix assignments are where students report a bug and try to get involved in the remediation process. Contributions are essentially larger bug fixes, and they are the final part of the course. Its aim is for students to get actively involved in open source communities, and again, students have a lot of freedom with this. They can either contribute to a bunch of different projects or a bunch of different communities, or only contribute to one. I chose to do all of mine on TigerOS, which is RIT's Linux distribution. Lastly, we had the literature reviews, or lit reviews. Lit reviews are where students review anything written related to FOSS and open source. This can include, books, articles, blog posts, or even tweet threads. Each student did 5 lit reviews. In each lit review, students usually write a summary, their opinions and questions, and really just document what they thought about the media as a whole. This is the primary media I used to create my resource database last semester. In other words, I used the lit reviews, not necessarily what the students wrote, but their sources, to make an open work reference. So now we can get into the research. The objective of the research was to create a small collection of professional development resources for the faculty at RIT. This was one of the requests on the Open at RIT wish list, so I thought they would appreciate the effort. The research process totaled 6 months. Essentially, after each literature review, I would create summaries for the articles that each student submitted. Then I would create a detailed bibliography for each article. This process would take me around 1.5 weeks for each submission of the lit review assignments. By the end of the semester, I made over 75 summaries and bibliographies. By the end of the summer, I covered probably 190 sources total, but that does not mean they kept all of it. In fact, I think they narrowed it down so much that the main database only has around 2 articles per section, and then there's a separate database that if people are interested in learning a lot, they can go access that one. But the main database only has around 2 articles in each section that I reviewed. And all of this information is stored on Zotero, which is a FOSS reference management software, and it's publicly available for anyone to view at any time. I'll be pasting the link to the Zotero library after this talk, or you can find it on RIT's website. So what did my research cover? First, I looked at extremism in the FOSS community, and oh boy, is there a lot of it. Many privacy and ethical tech advocates swear by FOSS for everything. However, the zealotry can go beyond the tech sector. For example, Universal basic income and Second Amendment rights advocates often promote FOSS as a way to either promote safety and reliability. Although FOSS advocates may seem a little crazy touting this stuff, especially when it doesn't relate to the tech sector, software is used for a lot of things, including distributing the money for universal basic income and programming, weapons. And it's true that having a lot of freedom helps people do a lot of things, regardless of what it is legally, morally, economically, and politically. The same is true for security. Although FOSS advocates would have you believe that all FOSS-developed software is 10,000 times better than the security of proprietary software, that's not entirely true, especially when you look at random people's projects on GitHub. Nobody should be arguing that my personal FOSS projects are more secure than Microsoft's proprietary code. I'm only one person with $0 in funding and limited programming experience. There is no way that my software security is even comparable to Microsoft's proprietary code. The benefits of FOSS in terms of security show in medium and larger sized projects. When researchers at MIT, Harvard, Stanford, and Sorbonne examined security trends between open source and proprietary software projects of the same size, open source was a clear winner. These studies at MIT, Harvard, etc., weren't just done once. These were done probably around 5 times at each university independently. So these universities have been analyzing open source for a very long time and have showed repeated results arguing for the FOSS security is better than proprietary projects. So in other words, developed FOSS projects are more secure than proprietary projects of the same size on average. Furthermore, among the open source software that uses licenses including Freedom 3, which for those of you who don't know, Freedom 3 allows for the redistribution of modified code, usually inside a company. Open source code is significantly more secure. This is because organizations, particularly the ones that implement security updates for the FOSS that they use, can take out unneeded aspects of the software and redistribute it throughout the organization. When it comes to organization security, the more software you're using means the more potential vulnerabilities. So being able to take out unneeded code is a huge plus. However, the world creates so much software that, in my personal opinion, it's really hard to wholeheartedly support the research conducted in the last 5 years. In other words, there's a personal dilemma going on here. I don't think these numbers are all that exact because of tech's ever-changing landscape. These studies can be easily replicated with time and money to keep these FOSS security statistics up to date. However, every time there's a large vulnerability and all that, these things need to be reevaluated. And given that these vulnerabilities happen every other month, we would need so much funding, and these studies would need to be replicated every 2 years, ideally every 2 months, and that's just not possible. Another thing is that, in order not to discredit proprietary software developers, I dislike making generalized statements against their work. Again, this is another personal thing. However, I don't think the people who conducted these studies at, Stanford and Sorbonne would have a problem, saying anything. Because the academic research we have, which cares about outliers, being peer-reviewed, and the number of project users, show FOSS as more secure across the board. Company-sponsored research around FOSS, especially studies that include, individual or, random projects like mine, show different results. Again, if you're including my school projects and tens of thousands of random people's projects on GitHub as being fully legitimate FOSS projects, which they are, however, they're just not widely adopted, like, say, Python or WordPress. Of course, FOSS will be shown to be insecure. You're including 5th grade students' projects. Anyways, as a general vibe, though, I like to think of FOSS projects as being 10 to 20% more secure on average. I got the 10 to 20% range from peer-reviewed studies too, but that's the minimum to the maximum, I guess. So now that we've covered pro-FOSS extremism, let's look at the villainization of FOSS. Many companies, both private and public, like to vilify open source. I find this hilarious because most technology is built on top of FOSS. Furthermore, the information these companies publish contradict the hate. For example, I recently interviewed a company about if they use or contribute to open source software, and they replied by saying, no, we actually found that 3 out of 10 vulnerabilities are caused because of open source software. I can send you a report. And as a little backstory, I interviewed this company as a cybersecurity reporter, and that's how I got to be talking about these things with this company. And so I was like, well, that's kind of weird, right? Because there's open source and then there's proprietary software. If open source is responsible for 3/10 of the vulnerabilities, that means proprietary software is responsible for 7/10 of the vulnerabilities, which makes up a significantly larger portion. So I obviously had to ask about the tone of their report, which was, clearly villainizing, open source software. And they responded with saying that whoever invests in their company does not like the term open source, like it hurts their reputation. I did some research into this, and this is actually true for many companies. It doesn't matter if it's in the tech sector or not. FOSS and open source are buzzwords in the tech community. So when you talk to developers themselves, they tend to like open source. However, if you talk to lawyers, finance departments, medical people, etc., none of them like open source. They're all hung up on the idea of patents and restrictions. Even the woman's razor commercials I see talk about patented technology, and it's a razor. So, furthermore, these non-tech people, they're rightfully investing in tech companies, so these organizations need to care about what they think. No wonder tech orgs are publishing crap statistics, but doing the opposite, i.e. using FOSS inside the company itself. They need investors. Although I don't want to state exactly who published this research because it's being recorded, you can find it, or you can just believe the story or not. You can Google the statistic on the screen and it will pop up. So given that companies are at least publicly stating that they dislike or do not use FOSS while also using FOSS, we need to consider who is responsible for FOSS security. According to a report by Sync, 85% of developers feel that organizations are responsible for the security of their open software. So do 55% of security teams and 35% of operational departments. I think that determining the responsibility of FOSS security is tough, especially since the issue has not been explored enough to form a general consensus in academia. Thus, we all have valid opinions on how FOSS security should be dealt with. We know that when companies are using FOSS software with licenses including Freedom 3, that security is often improved within the organization. If the organization does not patch their FOSS software, however, security decreases. So it makes sense to have the majority of the burden be on the organization when it comes to FOSS with Freedom 3, because this means if there's been vulnerabilities disclosed in the software, they can very easily update them. Another time I think organizations should hold the burden of FOSS security is if the org is using a small developer's code. For example, they just copied some code from me, and they're now I'm now the sole burden of this code, right? If it's open source, you can technically write a new program doing the same concept. You don't need to have a singular person, a singular student, determining the security of your whole organization's project, right? So make sure that the FOSS that you're using has a community set up so that if, let's say, a developer dies, or let's say the developer no longer wants to continue it, right? You'll know that that software will still be alive, right? That software will still continue. If they don't do that, which a lot of companies don't, you'll then be stuck. And what happens is that a developer will die or doesn't want to work on a project anymore, and all these different companies will have to code new patches and stuff for their security, right? And because all of it's proprietary code now, none of them can share each other's code. So when vulnerabilities are disclosed at one company, you can't track them at the other companies, which makes global security much harder to track. I think where FOSS developers need to be responsible for security is if they do not allow organizations to modify their code. Because this means if an organization finds a flaw in the code and even reports that code, if the open source software community doesn't deal with it, organizations are literally just stuck. They can't fix the code that they told you has a vulnerability in it. Another benefit to FOSS is the economics component, which can also improve security. We need to remember that there is a lot of monetarily free software, free FOSS software. So for people in developing countries that cannot afford an education but want to learn how to code to a point where large projects will accept their commits, it's a great way to get a job without getting a formal education. In one Harvard study, they found that the economic growth in developing countries almost mirrors GitHub commits in that country to open source repositories. There's also an increase in jobs of the same trends. Similar trends have been shown to developed nations too, but not as strong. In other words, FOSS contributions contribute to economic growth anywhere in the world. Furthermore, when countries spend more money on its technology and making money through tech means, security often becomes a focus. They're spending money to protect the money they already have and the money they could potentially make in the future. Okay, so we covered FOSS security from a business standpoint. So what about from an individual level? Does using FOSS for your daily driver or for primary use increase your personal security? Honestly, I have no idea. It really depends on how much of the software you use and how much you change. Because if you take FOSS software, right, and you change a bunch of it so that it no longer even really mirrors the original project, it's very hard to determine if your security is good or not. Because if you changed everything, you can't really track it. However, if you're interested in the general idea of increasing security, like you're not going to edit all the programs on your computer and all that, but are thrilled about the idea of promoting ethical technology, personal freedom, privacy, and human rights, then switching to FOSS is definitely the right move. Ways to switch to FOSS include switching to Linux, using primarily FOSS software, and contributing to FOSS, especially if your language and coding skills are good. Many FOSS communities struggle to find people to write READMEs, especially ones that are not in English. So, if you're good at, Chinese or Japanese or, any foreign language, it's like almost very easy to contribute to very large open source projects like the documentation of. It's very easy to contribute to them and then talk to the developers who are creating those projects. And I believe that's two great ways to get an internship right there if you're bilingual and understand code. Lastly, if you can afford it, like when you're buying your laptop every 2 to 3 years, and you can spend around like $1,500 on a laptop, consider buying one from an ethically conscious company like System76, who minimize human exploitation and use almost all FOSS code and hardware. So you want to get involved in FOSS at RIT. RIT was the first school in the United States to offer a FOSS academic program. RIT remains the only FOSS program in the United States, but Johns Hopkins and a few other universities are currently developing FOSS programs too. RIT's FOSS program became very successful, and in late 2020, RIT got funding to create an open office, which is called Open at RIT. Open at RIT is responsible for publishing open research. We have a lot of professors who publish openly on things like car and aerospace security. So if you're into SpaceX and Tesla, I'd highly recommend you check out that stuff, because when you're doing your interviews for those companies, right, you can show them your capabilities versus just saying that you've done stuff before, right? You can show exactly what you did, how it works, and how it can potentially benefit them. And what's strange is that, our research is very similar to what these. Open at RIT is also responsible for student programs like the FOSS Immersion and Minor, which are also open to all majors. All majors include cybersecurity students, so if you're interested in creating personal projects or just have an interest in the open source community, you found your immersion. I also think it's funny though, because C-STEC students are not allowed to do an immersion in software engineering or computer science, but you are allowed to do an immersion in free and open source software. We also help with co-op assistance. We have strong connections to a lot of major companies and organizations. Like, reach out to anyone on the advisory board and they will for sure give you their time, especially if you have like evidence, like documenting that you've actually contributed to projects and can show that you've worked in a community open source setting. We also have strong ties to RIT's Linux user group, or LUG. Lastly, we help students with research, personal projects, and academic and industry conferences. So here's just a slide that has all like the links to some of the things at RIT that I just talked about. It doesn't really benefit you right now, but if you go back and look at the slides and click on the links, you can find exactly what I'm talking about. So yeah, so I hope you all enjoyed my presentation. I realize that it's a little bit of an abrupt ending, but you know, that's all the content I have. So if you have questions, please DM me or ask me after my presentation. And yeah, so thank you so much.